that some of which is different than the history of the way this has been attacked in the country. First of all, we were looking for low-cost things. We wanted to make sure that we attracted a critical mass of people in these first waves. We think still do. We can tell sort of the change in attitudes as we've gone along, that once you have a sort of established base of people who are peers of other folks who may come along, some of the cooties have come off of the project and people go, oh yeah, I guess that's okay, we can join that because somebody I know joined that and they didn't die or wander away into the wilderness or have their institution collapse or something. As a matter of fact, they're doing quite well. So we're at that point with an awful lot of folks. Very high reliability. You know, I hear constantly about the need for more bandwidth, and I don't really disagree, but I guess I disagree with the absence of discussions about the need for high reliability generally, and especially in the health sector. If you are, for example, a rural clinic who hopes to mount an electronic health record application by doing remote access to that electronic health record, then you're only up, your EHR is only up when your connection is up. And when it's down, there are one or two possibilities. If you've done a poor job of getting value out of your electronic health record, then when it's down, you don't miss it much. That's not a desired outcome, though. When you've done a great job of getting value out of your EHR, you're going to miss it like crazy. You may have to close your clinic, at least temporarily. You may have to send people who are on hourly wages home, especially if you're running a low-end kind of a clinic for low-income people who got there by guess and by gosh and by bus and by everything else. The thought of sending them home and asking them to come back again some other day gets to be really kind of a difficult thing to imagine. So not only do you need this to function, I think you need this for adoption. You need very high reliability for adoption. The other point where high reliability is really important is disaster resistance. Most of the public nonprofit healthcare providers in the state are not just there when the sun is shining. They are especially needed when communities are in disaster mode. And we've had quite a disastrous year here in North Carolina. We've had a hurricane, we've had tremendous tornadoes that came through last spring. We've even had an earthquake, which is kind of unusual and sort of made people a little nervous. They didn't know we'd have earthquakes. But hurricanes, ice storms, tornadoes are really pretty typical for North Carolina in a given year, and for a lot of other states. And healthcare institutions, public health, well, about 70 or 80% of the public health clinics in the state are the center for disaster response for that community. Not just the health center, they are the center for disaster response in that community. And communities that have hospitals with emergency rooms, of course, they have to remain open. And again, they have a choice about how they employ information technology. They can make little use of it, or at least little use of elements that require connectivity, and not get as much value as they should out of it because they can't trust it when they have hard weather. Or they can make sure that they've got something that really works for them regardless of what's going on with the weather and get much more value out of it. So that's why disaster resistance, I think, needs to be a peer to bandwidth, latency, jitter, those other engineering factors when we think about these networks. We decided to go with high bandwidth with no oversubscription. You know, an awful lot of times when you go get a commercial application or a commercial lease service of some kind, you'll be told that you got X number of megabits per second. And sure enough, the instantaneous data transfer rate out of your organization is X. But that means that's just about the most you'll ever get out of it. Actual performance at the peak of the day might be half X, 3/4 X, 40% of X, depending on what other demands are on the switches and the links upstream from you. And we decided to engineer to an actual amount. So if we sell you 10 megabits per second, you actually get 10 megabits per second bidirectionally, 24/7, 365, regardless of what else anybody else is doing on the network. We thought that was a much better model than the traditional one. Supporting key communications among health and care stakeholders, we'll go over that a little bit later, but we actually thought about the applications, what people would best be using this for, and made sure that we could do this. Here's another thing that really is different than the history of healthcare organizations getting broadband. high user collaboration in the business of building, designing, and deploying and operating this network. So it really is seen from the user's perspective as a network that they have some impact on, that they get regular feedback about its performance, not just at their site, but overall. So we actually are having more of a community model here. Here are the key collaborators that you see here in North Carolina, and this gives you an idea how we involve the user community. All of these folks have had tremendous stuff. And now we do have one federal agency down there, the FCC and USAC. Of course, they were very good about providing the funding in the form of the Rural Healthcare Pilot Program that helped push a lot of this along, and have done a great job with that. As I mentioned before, we've done this in phases. This was conceived starting in late 2007. As I recall, it was like early December. And the first phase was 2 rounds of public health free clinics and a few community health centers, and it's been operational since late last calendar year. We are at the end of a second round of recruiting for hospitals, and those round 1 sites are being implemented now. The round 2 sites are not so far away. Here's a key that's really helped us a lot in terms of making all this go and essentially being a disruptive force in a positive sense here in the state in this area, is that we get funding from the Rural Healthcare Pilot Program, 85% discounts for subscribers for broadband services, and that for a total of $12.1 million that we're able to put towards this. Now that's a pilot program, and it's no longer open to people who want to do it, but it looks like, and you'll see later I'll talk a little bit more about it, that there's more coming in that arena. We also got a little bit of administrative startup money from the Division of Public Health, from Golden Leaf, and by a little I don't mean that it was inconsequential, I just mean compared to the benefits that came to the state, they did not have to put a substantial sum in. I think they each gave something in the area of $125,000, $150,000, just to make sure we had the administrative energy to push the program forward, as compared with a $12.1 million benefit for the state. Of course, that's a tiny amount of seed money. At this point, the administrative side is self-funded, so we have money from subscribers, part of which goes to defray administrative costs. And actually, the size of that fee was designed to make sure not just that we could keep the operating system operating, but that we could grow it and could bring in more subscribers and could improve services and be ready to take advantage of the next opportunities that come along in this area. Some key applications for the NCTN. Some of you may know these terms, others not. I'll try to be a little more descriptive than I might be with a health-centric audience. Health information exchange. This is a concept that's gotten a lot of implementation attention recently. It's the idea that healthcare providers ought to be in a position to routinely, in a way that's very facile and very useful, exchange information about patients, and in other models have patients be able to exchange information with patients in a way that moves them, that improves care, improves efficiencies, and improves safety in particular. So I can give you one fact that will show you some of the dynamics here. So we're moving towards an area where this is a lot easier than it used to be. And one area that people look forward to is reducing duplicate lab tests. Today, overall in the country, about 20% of lab tests are done in duplication merely because the information isn't available at the point that it's needed by a given provider. Now the good news is, with a thoughtful sharing of information, an awful lot of that 20% can go away. And that's really good news on the surface, and we all look at that and say, great, that's a good benefit. The bad part of this, as I'm sure you all are aware, is that any inefficiency is somebody's income. And so what will happen is there'll be 20% fewer lab tests. And so pushing this initiative along means moving people against some of their acute economic advantages that they get from the current inefficiencies. And so this is just a step in that direction. It's not enough all by itself. We'll have to also overcome some of the perverse incentives that we have in the healthcare system today. Electronic health records, especially those that are remote models of various kinds. ASP models are a good example. This is a really good way for a lot of very small clinics to get the functionality that they need in order to drive a lot of efficiencies inside their clinic. And it's a little harder for them to do it locally. You where the servers are local and everything else is local, because then you take, well, about a third of our physicians are in solo practices. Think about that. Especially in rural areas, they're like this, a third. We'll pick that as sort of the peak group here. Now, what does that mean? That means you have a doctor, a receptionist / spouse, and a part-time temporary nurse. And that's the practice. And introducing the idea that they're going to have to take care of a bunch of technology is just a non-starter for almost all these guys, right? So a remote model where they sort of log onto it like a website from their perspective is really good, but it's only good if the network is up. Without the network, at any point in time, they are severed from their ability to run their clinic. And again, you're back to that trade-off. If you make great use of your EHR, then you're really hurt when it's down. If you don't make great use, then you're not hurt so much, but why on earth are you doing this if you're not making great use? That's kind of counterintuitive. Teleeducation. There are an awful lot of healthcare providers who are required to have CEUs and other kinds of things that relate to their continuing professional education. Some of them, of course, would really, really prefer to go away for their professional education. It's a great tax deduction, and it's spending a week in a nice location where you get 4 hours a day worth of education and 8 hours a day worth of play is a nice vacation of a type. But there are also plenty of providers who just really struggle to get this done, especially people who are in the allied health field, who really can't afford to take off for a great vacation anyway. So this is a great way to bring that kind of education to those folks. And generally, you need fairly good reliability, medium amounts of bandwidth to do this sort of thing, and pretty good reliability. There's the possibility that we'll be able to do some better things with Internet 2 connections in this area in the not so distant future. Web-based education, enduring materials kinds of approaches is another approach as opposed to live training. And that's beginning to get, not just in continuing education, but in education period. I'm sure Myra can speak to this with a lot more statistics than I can. Is getting enough of a connection with how people think about getting an education now that this is probably a nice new growth sector. Telehealth, this is what people iconically think of when they think about telemedicine. They think about live medical imaging and the idea of doing things that are very high bandwidth, but also require very high reliability in order to be done. If you're going to, how many people want to be in an ICU that is remotely monitored by physicians over a flaky link? No, right? You want rock solid links if you're going to do that. So there's a good example of why you need to also look at reliability. Store and forward type methodologies for MRIs, radiographs, CAT scans, dermatology, even those sorts of things don't require tremendous reliability because they're, nor tremendous bandwidth, but they're also very useful. An awful lot of these applications, by the way, are having trouble exploding in the world, and they have for the last 25 or 30 years had trouble exploding. Mostly because our fee-for-service healthcare system drives people in the opposite direction. They'd rather have you come in and see them personally. They'd rather have you come to the medical center. Most of the telehealth applications that I've been successful with, and I was a telehealth director for 6 years, have been ones that drew in business, right? That one way or another, even if they didn't directly pay for themselves, brought a lot of business to the place. And so that's been the traditional model that's been most successful. But the need to, hopefully, as the healthcare industry changes to something that's not so much fee-for-service based, but a little more based on prevention, a little more based on collections of healthcare entities making changes that will result in better community health, those kinds of changes that you'll see more uptake of these things. So they're definitely more cost effective. Especially bad in remote areas. One of my jokes is the reason that Medicare has been so slow to approve reimbursement for these things is that there's no upside for them. This is extra cost for them because more people would get service. Now, my usual cliche, my usual cute remark for this is the reason Medicare doesn't do much in the way of telehealth is that it works. They're afraid it might work really well. And that's really, I'm not making fun of them, that's a real underwriting problem. You're going to get a lot of people who are paying into Medicare now but aren't getting service. all of a sudden start getting service. Well, that's more you have to pay for, but not more income to pay for it. So that's another one of those great examples. Disaster response, we thought we needed this because of the kinds of applications that we had. This, again, you need very high levels of reliability. We do double loops, that is 2 independent loops to a lot of the hospitals, and I think we still have some other things to go. I will say that having been through a bad year here in North Carolina in terms of, since our network came up first, we have had no outages. Although there have been plenty of folks who've had outages generally, we've had no outages. So I think we may have built up some goodwill and some willingness for people to go ahead in the next year and begin to build some applications that depend on disaster response. Let's see, oops, there we go. So next steps for us, completing this phase 2, the plan to make an NCTN association that builds on this sort of broad concept of having a community-driven network. Now it'll be a little more formal, having a 501c3 that drives this on a continuing basis. Preparing to use the reformed FCC Rural Healthcare Program. If they do in the final one what they did in the proposed rule, then we should expect to see a lot of discounts again, at least 50%, maybe more. Easy transition for the existing subscribers, and a way to move more people into the network than a lot more than we've had today. One interesting thing about this program is that it covers public and nonprofit healthcare providers. And people have often said, well, what about the for-profit guys? And I wish I had a nice, neat answer for the for-profits, but I do have one observation. There are fewer and fewer of them all the time. And the reason is that so many of the small private, what used to be private for-profit clinics, are being bought up by big nonprofit health systems, right? And that's really a positive development with relationship to both the desire and the barriers to making a thing like this be bigger. We're now in a position where thousands of practices that just a decade ago would not have been available for this program are available now. And another set of thousands to go here in North Carolina, but a good deal more penetration than we had before. Let's see, we mentioned that plan to... Right. One of the things we get as we scale up here a little bit in particular is that we get an ability to offer low-cost attachments without discounts to private institutions, and we think an awful lot of those folks will come along as they look at the net value of this. And I put a Q&A thing here, but I don't think we want to stop for Q&A. I think Myra wants to do her thing, and I would appreciate her doing her thing. Did I do enough to entertain them, Myra? She said I had to really entertain them.
I said you had to be very entertaining.
Okay. We'll take questions after Myra's.
Thank you. I must say, I'm delighted to be with you today. And so that you will appreciate that, it's a rare occasion that I met at the door when I come to speak to groups where the person meeting me was Richard Kelly, and he said, oh, thank God you can talk. I'm not usually met with that. It's like, please don't talk so much. But he was representing that. I was very ill last week and could not speak at all. So I am happy to be here for that particular reason. And as Jane said, and I really like the way she introduced me being a genius at getting money, but it's really not being a genius at getting money. It's about timing and knowledge and having an incredible group of people working with you to help make things happen in the General Assembly. And I can say, as we've been through the work we've done here in North Carolina with eLearning, we have been incredibly fortunate that we've had a mixed group of people involved in this process, and we've had the right players involved in making this effort happen for us. And there's a lot of parallel to what you see happen with the telehealth networks, and that is we're all about the same thing, is how can we provide every citizen in the state of North Carolina opportunity, not just for quality health care, but also a high quality education, because that is the linchpin for economic development anywhere. And I do believe I am my brother's keeper, and I believe that we have to find opportunities to make sure that everyone and every citizen has an opportunity. And if you know the governor, Beth Perdue, then you know that is her guiding principle, that we have to find every opportunity to make things work for all children, no matter their age, and all citizens. And a big part of what we've done with eLearning has been the P20 strategy, from, some people like to call it, from the high chair to the rocking chair, and making sure we have an infrastructure that helps support that. So what I would like to do let me make sure I'm working here, is that during this presentation is to talk to you about the purpose, who the eLearning Commission is and its overall purpose, what its accomplishments are, and what are our next steps with the commission. What I will say is the commission originally came together when the governor was then lieutenant governor, and it was a major initiative for her of identifying people that had knowledge, had interest. It was a public-private group of people coming together so that when we focused on learning and what we could do to improve quality learning for children in North Carolina, that we found a strategy that met the needs of all children. So that was an initial thought. It was never about technology initially, but as we got into this and we began to bring people together, I will have to give a lot of credit to Jane Patterson for the work she's done, because she really has laid the groundwork in many ways for much of the work we've done. And what I would say is the eLearning Commission has really built on many of the investments that have already been made in the state of North Carolina, and what we tried to do was make them better. And a way to do that was, again, utilizing the talent that was there. But again, the public-private partnership approach works very well. And you have to begin by clearly defining the state role. And I think a lot of times we go out and approach issues with trying to figure out how we want to accomplish the whole picture, but we have to stop sometimes and think about what is the most appropriate role for the state, what is the most appropriate role for the local level, and then how do we build a public-private partnership to make that happen. But in this particular case, in going back to the overall composition of the commission and getting things done, because it did require working with the General Assembly, and the governor obviously is governor because she's very smart about how to be strategic and putting together groups of people. So the current eLearning Commission is a addition of what we started originally as the Beta Commission that she chaired as Lieutenant Governor. The chairs of the commission are the Lieutenant Governor, Walter Dalton, who is a tremendous asset and advocate for what we're doing. The vice chairs are Senator Richard Stevens, who is in the leadership role in the General Assembly, Representative Joe Tolson, who is a former leader with information technology in the General Assembly. So in putting together the commission, we had the right leadership. We had the governor, we had the lieutenant governor, and we had key leaders in the General Assembly to help us work through what needed to be done. And probably the most important part is we have 30 of the most talented people who have been true missionaries about their work in technology. You do have the handouts, and you also have a link to the eLearning North Carolina, which will tell you who the members of the commission are, but you'll have to link back to that. I don't have the actual list. But when you look at that list, you will see talent at the university level, talent at the community college. You'll see talent from the public school, from the business sector, public and private. And what I would say is that we were very clever in that we got the best of everyone. So that was a real key for us. And again, it's about timing, knowledge, and being persistent. The commission was created through an executive order. We had been an informal group up until that time, and the governor was not seeing the results that she would like to see out of the commission, so we did reconfigure it just a little bit. And the governor was very clear about some of the roles and responsibilities she wanted the commission to take on. So under our current operation, one of the key roles that she would like for us to focus on is developing a unified data system, again, which would enable us to track information not only on K-12, but the whole P20, and it would be birth forward, and it would also connect to other systems in the state. And that's a part of what we're beginning to work on now. We do have a unique student identifier, but we are now looking at how we pull all of our systems together, not just education, but employment security, healthcare, the judicial system, so that we can in fact access comprehensive data so that we make good decisions about what needs to be done. The second is to improve the network services and learning options for all citizens. Again, that's a P20 strategy when initially we really started out doing K-12, but we bridged across all of that. The third is to identify the major improvements so that we continue to drive and push improvement and change in North Carolina. You know, when you work with state government, you work with bureaucracies, we don't always do things very efficiently and very quickly. So sometimes it's good to have a conscience, and we really do serve in that role as a conscience to help make that happen. And again, a big part of that, what we have learned as we've gone through this, is we begin to meet barriers in terms of policy. So another big challenge we have is how do we change policies that create that greater flexibility across all venues for technology, because it does change the need for governance structure changes, and you'll see a little bit more about that as I go into this. And know that I am a policy wonk, so that's really what drives what we do. You have to have a clear understanding of policy. You have to know how to leverage that structure that's in place. That's the only way you can change it. Otherwise, you can't get the support you need to make the changes happen. And again, and you'll see our final charge from the governor is provide advice to her on any other issues. And trust me, she broadens our role every day. As a matter of fact, I got 2 emails from her this morning. She is in China, by the way, on a trip, and she has found 2 new wonderful opportunities while she's over there. So, and I'm the beneficiary of that work. So, but I do think it's important for me to at least show you the slides that I went through the trouble to develop instead of continuing to talk. But I think one of the things that's important to recognize is the accomplishments that the Commission has made. And again, I think it's very important that you build on assets that you already have. And I have some fascinating stories I could tell you, but I won't, because I'm probably getting a lot of trouble for them. But I would say that building from your strength and what you have is very key. And Jane did mention, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it, the North Carolina Virtual Public School. But we changed our focus and direction when the governor wanted to create the North Carolina Virtual Public School. And the reason we changed our direction is we created the virtual school, and then we found out that most children in the state that needed it the most couldn't take advantage of it because they had no connectivity. So that kind of changed our direction, and the most amazing thing about the people I've worked with is not only are they talented, but they're also smart enough to recognize that if we're going to end up reaching the end goal, which is improving the quality of education for all people in North Carolina, then we have to target and focus. While they had their own vested interest in what we were doing, they recognized quickly that if we don't have that core strong, which is K-12 education piece, they were willing to put aside their issues and their needs so that we could work toward improving K-12 first. And we had so many children in so many pockets of places in the state where schools could not afford connectivity, and if you work much in public schools or in that arena, and I'm sure you find it in most rural areas, in terms of talent, we do not have a workforce in the public school system that understands technology. Most of the people you have dealing with technology in public schools are people who were instructors who have picked it up and learned along the way. I'm an example of that. What I know about technology, I picked up as I've gone. I'm dangerous. The key thing that we've done, and I don't have enough good things to say about this group, is the development of the statewide education network through MCNC's North Carolina Research and Education Network. As a matter of fact, I think I saw Mark coming in. Mark's back there. What I would say, the lesson to learn is as a nonprofit, and we formed a public-private partnership and built on the investment that had been made in that network, which happened to be started by Jane Patterson. And we developed a strategy whereby we could connect all of our public schools to this network. The universities were already connected to it. Many of our public and private universities were connected to it. And so what we started was the School Connectivity Initiative so that we could connect all of our public schools to this network so that at the end of the day, we would have all of education connected to the single network. And that was important because we wanted to reach a place where we could do true collaboration across P20. We could learn from each other. We could improve, for example, our schools of education by having teachers that could go and actually collaborate daily through technology in all parts of the state, because we do have an issue about improving the quality of all kinds of education opportunities. And so to do that, again, I can't say enough good things about the staff at MCNC, because they had to take much of their personal time and put feet on the street, as I call it. They've actually been in every school district in the state. We did a partnership with the Friday Institute, which is an innovation partnership at the North Carolina State, and they combined with MCNC and the state to work together to create a way to fund, build this network for students. It's a $19 million investment, and at the time we did that, we thought we were quite clever in that we built it using E-rate reimbursement back to the state. We found that our districts were not taking advantage of that, and at the time we started with $6 million, I believe. We were bringing back into the state $24 million, and today I think we're up to $130 million from federal money, and that money goes straight back to the LEAs so they can build and enhance their own networks to take advantage of learning opportunities. Another key success we've had has been the North Carolina Virtual Public School. Once we got the connectivity fixed so that the schools could take advantage of it, we are the second fastest growing virtual public school in the state. We went from having 3,000 students in 2006 to more than 45,000. I think we're actually up to 58,000 today. So you can see that once that opportunity is to build it, and they will come, is true. If the opportunity is not there, people can't take advantage of it. And so you have to continue to build on that. What has happened as a result of that success has been many school districts have begun to do the one-to-one computing, giving students computers so they can use them at home, which gets again back to the need to have broadband into every home in the community. And that's another charge we have through the work of the commission. As a result of that investment, and again, I'd say you have to think strategically, and again, it's a policy issue. We took the investment we made in the state and the state investment, and much of what we're doing with the $400 million that we were able to get through Race to the Top is built off the work we did. And we have used that investment to enhance the services that you will be hearing about. And you have copies of some of this in your handouts. But I think the important part is that we didn't try to start from scratch, start something new. What we did is we were building and enhancing what we already had in place. As a result of that investment, we are investing in cloud computing. And I'll have to say Phil Emer is leading that initiative, and Phil works with the Friday Institute, actually was a former employee at MCNC, and has worked on that particular piece of work so that we are moving our education to cloud computing, and a part of that, which is very critical and parallels the work we need in many areas of care across the state, including healthcare, is through the cloud we'll be able to do shared services that we've not been able to do before, so that we'll get efficient costing for many. You can see this big picture shows you from start to finish how those what the big picture will look like in terms of enterprise application and the network services. But had we not made that, taken the time to invest in the infrastructure necessary, we could not get to the real work that needs to be done. And the people that were working on this effort understood that and were willing to stay the course, and the General Assembly has been with us on that. Hopefully they will stay with us, maybe. And this gives you an idea of the Race to the Top technology support strategy for improving that, and you do have copies of that. You can see it much better on your handouts. But without belaboring that, I would just ask you to refer to that later. It'll be more effective for you to do that. The second part, as an outcome of that investment, has been, again, through the incredible talent and leadership at MCNC, that MCNC also took advantage of the federal money available through American Recovery Reinvestment Act to get additional money for broadband through the VTOP program. And that's a capital investment, and they are building the middle mile out across the state. And if you're interested in broadband, you understand that the middle mile will enable get the fiber out closer to the areas of the state that need it. And it'll make it a shared opportunity where healthcare will benefit in other areas as well. And this is a map of what that looks like. You have that as well in your handouts. And then that brings us to what's next as a result of what we've done in this area. Well, next we'll continue the work that Jane has done on broadband to the rural parts of the state. We are going to continue the work on the unified data system. And what I will tell you in the meetings that I've been through nationally, we are faced with the same challenges with other states, whether it's urban or otherwise, that even if they have connectivity, people don't know necessarily how to do it. They're finding a huge challenge with bureaucracies and government, with policies and rules and regulation that keep them from being able to take advantage on being more efficient. The biggest issue that continues to come up, which may be familiar to you, depending upon your work, is the whole issue of procurement. I've been to 3 different national meetings in 3 different areas, one on data system, one on connectivity. It was all around education, and the number one issue raised, whether it was a person that represented the governor's office, whether they represented the federal government, whether they represented business and industry, it was procurement was a huge barrier in being able to respond quickly and get things done. For instance, in North Carolina, we're already a year behind on what we can do with Race to the Top and our investment there. And we are under tight timelines in order to achieve what we need to achieve there. The cloud service is on target and on timeline, which we're pleased about that. We do have a little challenge. I do have to kind of nurture that along on the bureaucratic side. It's not for lack of effort on the people trying to do the work. And again, it's taking advantage of the applications that are available. We are making a major move over the next year, going to digital resources in our schools, moving away from textbooks. That is the work the commission will be moving forward. And again, if you're familiar with the bureaucratic structures of how we have to operate in states, you see the technology commissions, or not technology commissions, but textbook commissions, and the laws and rules we have about textbooks have been very restricted. And you'll see that many of the companies are moving much quicker ahead of making the changes they need to make, and the structures we have in place are holding us back. So it's how do we get beyond those restrictions we have in place so that we can really use technology in the way we need to do it. Another big push is in the area of virtual learning, particularly at the higher education side. We've not done much in that area, and that will be a target for us. And one of our key features is the development of the eLearning portal. You do have the web address on the information that we have. And what I would say to you is that it connects all of the e-learning opportunities in North Carolina. If you go to that portal, it will direct you anywhere you want to go. Higher ed, K-12, in any of those areas. It will direct you to professional development in many areas. It'll connect you to military training that's offered through there, but any e-learning opportunity we have is connected and a part of that portal. The other thing that we'll be doing with the portal is we'll be developing a personalization side to that. And again, I would encourage you to go to that website and learn more about it. And at this point, I will be happy to answer any question you may have. So I'm going to turn it back to Jane or David.
All right, I have a question. The universal database that you're building, what is that going to be used for, and what information does it contain?
Well, I'm going to transition back over to where I'm sitting and hand this off to Jane. But it's taking the data that we currently house in public education, the universities, employment security, and it is going to create a way to connect all of that data. So if we have a child that drops out of school today, thank you. Hello. Am I on? Yes, I'm on. Thank you. So that if a child, for instance, it'll give us access to a student if they leave a public school today and go to a community college this afternoon, we'll be able to track that data and provide the best services that we can for them. If you have students that are in middle school and they have been a part, or they have family that have been a part of the judicial system, we'll be able to access that information so that we can best support and help for that child we can. So it's about accessing all of our data systems so we can begin to target policy development. We can target funding into various parts of the state that need improvement. It'll help us provide better information about the job market in various parts of our state and what the needs are if we want to drive services to particular parts of the state. Question?
With that network, I think one of the challenges becomes, once you drive it to the community side, who's doing the work?
Once you drive it to the community side, who's doing the work there?
Or education, on the education or...
I mean, you mentioned a lot of things. If I track a student who is involved in the criminal justice system, or a student whose parents are involved in some other instance, you need to now have interventions. So the intervention might be a mental health intervention to a family that's going to get that child back on track. How does that e-learning system then support that network to move that student?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, it depends on who is accessing the information. If it's a public school and they find out that information, they have a student that comes to them from another district, and they get into that information and they see what the history and the background happens to be and what the problems are, then it would initiate from that school or that particular point of location. And then they would have, like they do now, instead of paper and pencil and having to do phone calls and taking a lot of time doing legwork that would not be necessary, they would have access to it that way and they could get service done quicker to the child.
We have some other questions?
I have one for Dave. When you were talking about moving your Dave.
Yes,
Moving the North Carolina TeleHealth Network to an association, a 501c3
Right.
organization, to let the community take over, be a community-driven network. What's your definition of community-driven network? What is it?
Well, by and large, I meant starting with and mostly focusing on the people who are the users of that network. And more broadly, the people who are beneficiaries. I'd like to have a public member or two, but this will be probably people from the main constituencies that are using the network. So
Like
the
the
public,
doctors?
well, the public health infrastructure, for example. If you go back to that slide of mine that had a list of maybe 10 or 12 folks there, you can see what the organizations that would be contributors to a thing like that would look like.
We passed out to you also the Education Cloud. Didn't specifically address every piece or anything like that, but that is something that the whole group is working on in the eLearning Commission as one of the issues, because we have found and determined that no matter what we do in North Carolina, we're not going to have enough people out there necessarily in the local level who are the tech support people and the servers, et cetera, that are all across the state, or would be better with a cloud that could be accessed by all the schools. And so that's the work, and Phil Emer, working with Myra and those, he's at the Friday Institute, is leading that initiative. And so if you want to get additional information in the future, you can email at myra.best@nc.gov, that's her email. And Dave is, I don't know, which one do you want them to have?
David Kirby IMC.
Yeah, David Kirby, David
at Kirby.
Dave at kirbyimc.com. You can get that information. And the other piece that was passed out was the actual list of the BTOP map is the one, this deals with MCNC and all of the money that's come in that allows this network. You can see the Middle Mile Network reps all across the state now in this. And this gets out to the community institutions across the state and to keep delivering the high-speed gigabits, if necessary, ultimately, that everybody's going to need all across North Carolina. Was it controversial? A little bit at first, I think. But I think Joe Fredoso, who heads it up, has used his golden tongue to get out across the state and try to make sure that public-private sector will be supportive of all of this. And actually, they have a lot of dark fiber, which is going to be marketed and sold, off that network as well, hopefully to some private sector providers to help push out the last mile as well off this middle mile architecture. Now, I'm told Shaheen arrived at the door back there like the nightingale or the ghost who comes in the night and went like this. So we have to go on to the next session. But But I hope you've gotten a sense of the applications that keep driving out the network out towards all across the state, towards not only the institutions, but the citizens that are out there as well. Thanks very much.